From croissant to cappuccino, words we borrowed from other languages enrich English vocabulary and connect us to diverse cultures. But what about their pronunciation? In today's video, I'm going to give you 10 loanwords, and I'd like you to say the pronunciation and guess which language they come from. Joining me for the challenge is Gideon from Let Them Talk TV. Gideon, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello, Luke. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and thanks for accepting the challenge. Are you ready for loanword number one?
I'm a bit nervous, but yes, go ahead.
So on the screen now, can you tell me how this word is pronounced and which language it comes from?
Yes, I know this word. I think there are two ways to pronounce it. Because I do speak some Spanish, and if I was saying it in Spanish, I would say amigo. But if I was using it as a loan word, I would say amigo. Is that right?
Well, maybe there's no right or wrong answer, but usually when we take words from other languages, we adapt them to our sound system, and this is known as anglicization. So this word in Spanish, we anglicize it, so often that first vowel becomes a schwa. So we often say amigo, rather than the Spanish amigo. At the end of this word, we have an O vowel in English rather than the O of Spanish. Another difference is the letter G, which is pronounced as a G sound in English, amigo, but in Spanish is a R sound. So an approximant here, amigo, rather than amigo.
We're using it as a loan word, but if you used it in English with a female, you'd probably also say amigo, not amiga, wouldn't you?
One of the reasons we anglicize it is that we're used to pronouncing the sounds of English rather than the sounds of other languages. So it's simply easier for English speakers to pronounce it in a more English way. The other thing is that we're used to hearing English sounds, so it makes more sense for communication if we're using English sounds rather than sounds from other languages. Yet another reason is that we may have never heard the pronunciation in the original language. There are going to be English speakers who have used the word amigo, but have never heard a Spanish person say it.
Very interesting. So, like in Spanish, it ends with an O sound, but we don't have many words in English, do we? That the last sound is an O, it's an O or something different. Is that the reason?
I suppose in my accent, I have an or vowel at the ends of words. So, for example, the past tense of see is saw, or, and that might be fairly similar.
Yeah,
but it's not exactly the same.
Okay. I remember what's in Fowler's modern usage, that when you're using a foreign word, a loan word in English, you don't want to sound exactly as it sounds in the foreign language, because firstly that might alienate someone. They might not recognize the word, but you don't want to sound as if it's too much like an English word. You kind of make a nod to the foreign language, just to indicate to the listener that it is a foreign word or a loan word, but nothing so close they wouldn't recognize what you're talking about. So
I suppose it's tricky to find the balance between giving a nod to that language and not sounding pretentious.
Exactly. It's a difficult line to draw, because, you know, if you've studied Spanish or another language, you know the rules of pronunciation and you want to follow those rules. But perhaps you shouldn't. I wouldn't say, if I'm speaking in English, I wouldn't say you're my amigo.
One thing that is a bugbear of mine is when people ask for ciabatta when they're ordering at an Italian deli in England. Whereas, of course, according to Italian spelling to sound rules, if you see a C and then the letter I, it's a ch and not a cia. So it's ch or cha rather than cia at the beginning of this word.
So it would be ciabatta rather than ciabatta. You'd still maintain sort of an English way of saying it, but
yes, exactly.
Respect the cha at the beginning.
Exactly.
Ciao, I suppose, as well would be another example.
Yes, exactly. Ciao. So I would add a schwa at the beginning, so ch rather than cha, and then I wouldn't geminate the T, so I wouldn't make the T longer. I would just say one T sound, ciabatta, and then a schwa at the end, ciabatta. Which, according to many Italians, would be butchering this word. It's anglicizing it, but still keeping the consonant sounds vaguely the same. Okay, let's take a look at word number 2.
This one I know pretty well. Café. It's quite close, the French and the English. Café.
I suppose a couple of differences here. In French, that first sound wouldn't be aspirated as much. So in English, we would say café, but in French, café, you're not going to add lots of air to the k. And the second thing is that we usually make the final vowel a diphthong. So it's a, café, at least in my accent. Whereas in French, it would be a monophthong, café. Do you know how people would pronounce this word in North America? How it would be different to our accents?
I'm not even going to try. I'll leave that to you. Tell me.
Well, the stress is different. Often when you have two-syllable words of a French origin, English people often place the stress on the first, café, whereas North Americans place it on the second, so café.
Café. Okay, yeah, that sounds familiar, yeah.
Let's take a look at number 3.
Number 3, not from a language that I know. I think it's Turkish, but
yes.
I would say doner kebab. I have no idea about the Turkish pronunciation.
That's how most English people would say it. Doner kebab. How would Americans pronounce it?
Doner kebab? Have I heard? Is that no?
I think the stress would still be the same.
Okay.
But the vowels might change.
Okay.
So some people would say doner, rather than doner. Mm-hmm. So the vowel has changed and we're adding the R in American English. And then in the second word, the second vowel is different. So rather than kebab with an A vowel in my accent, kebab with an A vowel in American English. This is how it's spelled in Turkish. Does that help you with the pronunciation?
Not at all.
So the pronunciation in Turkish, and Turkish speakers, you're going to probably comment and tell me how I've done it wrong. But the first word stresses on the second, and so it's döner. And so it's an type vowel at the beginning, and the stress is on the second, döner. And then it's kebab. Ends in a P.
Doner kebab in my bad Turkish.
Yes, and also in my bad Turkish. And also what I find really interesting about Turkish is that when you have an R sound at the end of a word and there's nothing following or a voiceless sound following, then that R, which is a R type sound, becomes voiceless. So it's doner rather than doner. That's something you'll hear from Turkish speakers.
Forgive me if I don't attempt that right now.
Okay, you don't have to go.
Doner. So it becomes voiceless. Doner instead of doner.
Yeah, exactly. Rather than rrr, it's a sound.
That's difficult to say.
Doner.
I'll practice at home later
on. Or at your local doner kebab.
Yeah. Yes.
Let's take a look at number 4.
Number 4, again from French, I would say, in English I say entrepreneur.
That's the usual pronunciation, entrepreneur, in England at least. And what about the French pronunciation?
Now, my French pronunciation isn't perfect, I should say. I would say something like entrepreneur. Entrepreneur. It's difficult with those French R's, but
it's not important to speak a language perfectly because perfection doesn't exist. And the most important thing is communication. But we could easily tell from your very good French R sounds that those R's have changed. There's another difference with this word, which is vowel nasalization. In French, that first vowel is nasalized and that N isn't pronounced. So it's something like entrepreneur. Entrepreneur. In American English, that final R is pronounced as an sound. So entrepreneur. Entrepreneur.
I heard entrepreneur. As some people have said to say that in America or something like that.
Yes, exactly. And that's an alternative pronunciation.
Okay.
Entrepreneur. Perhaps using French pronunciation particularly might sound pretentious in the English-speaking world, I think. I think we associate French culture with being high culture and perhaps imitating more of a French accent. Either you're intending to sound humorous or people are going to perceive it as quite pretentious.
I think so. And sometimes, as you said before, English people might just not understand. I'm always thinking of the example of, we say in English, cul-de-sac, a dead-end road. But the French pronunciation would be cul-de-sac, which is very different. And I would never say to anyone, don't go down there, it's a cul-de-sac. Firstly, you sound extremely pretentious. And secondly, they probably wouldn't understand what you're talking about.
Yes. Although it does add a little bit of je ne sais quoi.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Let's take a look at number 5.
Number 5. Now, I think this is from Greek. I think we've already had doner kebab. This is gyro, is it? Gyro? I'm not even sure in English, to be honest, because I think in America they usually say gyro or gyro, but for British we usually use kebab version, don't we? So I'm not even sure. You might have caught me out here. Gyro?
Well, I think a lot of English speakers won't know how to pronounce this or will come up with different ways to pronounce it. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, this is either gyro or gyro. But I think various pronunciations exist. Obviously, in Greek, it's written in a different alphabet, and there's also a s sound at the end. So in Greek, it's something like gyros. But English, gyro or giro, according to the Oxford English Dictionary.
Okay, that's interesting. Gyros. Okay, what does it literally mean? Do you know?
It means turning because the meat is turning on that spit.
Oh, like gyration that comes from the same word.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I see. That's very interesting. I got that one completely wrong. So, I've learned that.
I'm not sure if there's a right or a wrong here. It's simply how do we anglicise these words, and people will have different opinions. And the other thing is, do we first see these foreign words written down, or do we first hear them? And obviously, if you hear them, you're more likely to pick up that pronunciation. If you read it, you're more likely to try and apply some English spelling to sound rules, which is why jai rather than year.
Yeah.
We're more likely to say gyro rather than gyro here. It makes more sense according to English spelling to sound rules.
Yeah.
We've now reached the middle of the loanword pronunciation challenge, and this is just a reminder that it's not just English that has borrowed words from other languages. Other languages have also borrowed words from English. So we have jogging or jogging in French, we have handy in German, and we have sandwich in Russian. Now back to the challenge.
Okay, number 6. Now, this is from Japanese. Although it's kind of an English borrowing, I think, you might explain that later, but I know a little bit of Japanese. So in English, I say karaoke or karaoke, but I think in Japanese you would, say something like karaoke. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. What I find really strange about the anglicized pronunciation of this word is that it's karaoke, right? You wouldn't expect an E vowel here, karaoke, when the Japanese and the spelling clearly indicate some kind of A sound. But if you think about how English works, we never have an A followed by another vowel sound. It's always followed by a consonant. So we have cat, but not cat. Cat can't be a word in English, but cat can be because A is followed by a consonant sound. So here we can't say karaoke because there's a vowel following. E is a very common vowel to have before another vowel in English, so we say karaoke. And some speakers might say karaoke, but I think that's less common. I think karaoke is much more common.
That's very interesting. Yeah. Do you have the origin of the word?
So yes, I forgot to mention. So karaoke comes from two Japanese words meaning empty and orchestra. And the last part comes from the beginning of English orchestra. So orchestra. That's where it comes from, empty orchestra.
Thank you. Can I add that if you know the word karate, that kara at the beginning is the same. I think karate means open hand or something. Kara and te is hand. Te, if you want. And this is open orchestra. So there's a connection between the two words.
And this brings up, how do you pronounce a final E at the end of loanwords? Is it karate or karate? And people vary.
I would say karate, but I think they would say, the Japanese say karate or something. That would be a te, which you said we don't normally say in the word like that in English.
Exactly. We don't normally have an e vowel at the end of a word, apart from yeah. Let's take a look at number 7. How do you pronounce it, and which language does it come from?
Well, I am familiar with this one, and it's from Italian. I'm pretty sure about this. I would say, in English, I would say pasta with an sound at the end. I do know a little bit of Italian, and I would say pasta, something like that in Italian. Is that right?
Yes, you pronounce them really well. So in English, we usually have a schwa at the end, pasta. We also aspirate the first sound, the P, so we add some air to it, pasta. Whereas we don't aspirate in Italian, and we have an A at the end, pasta. Something else interesting is the way that North Americans pronounce this word. How is it different from speakers in England?
I'm not sure. Pasta or something like that? I'm not sure.
It's usually pronounced pasta. So
pasta, okay.
Vowel. Okay. So it sounds a bit like our pronunciation of pastor, as in a religious leader.
I see. Now you say, that sounds familiar, pasta, yeah. So we get it closer. We're a little bit closer to the original Italian in England.
Well, I suppose it depends where you think the Italian is. I guess it might be a bit in between that British and American pronunciation. Yes, I think probably our pronunciation is slightly closer, but I mean, it's not the Italian pronunciation. Let's take a look at number 8.
Number 8. Now, I know which language this comes from, and it's Vietnamese, isn't it? Is it Vietnamese?
Yes.
Is it pho? Something like that?
Yeah, it's an vowel like we have in the word fur, as in fur coat, for instance. In Vietnamese, it's spelled slightly different in that the O has a little hook on it, and there's almost like a question mark on top of the O, and the little question mark indicates that there's a tone. Obviously, in English, we don't have tones that change the meanings of words, but in Vietnamese, there are these tones. So it's something like fur, whereas in English, we say fur. So we keep the vowel, but we anglicize it in that we don't keep the tone.
Okay. I've heard people pronounce it po and things like that.
I think Vietnamese speakers would be a little annoyed if you said pho or po. But yes, interestingly, Vietnamese does use the Latin alphabet. So PH here indicates a f sound like it does in phone in English. Let's take a look at number 9.
Number 9. Now, I think this is from Quechua language. Am I right? I don't know much Quechua, Luke. I'm thinking that the English got it from Spanish.
Correct.
So maybe, in quinoa. No, I think there's a disagreement in England how to pronounce it. Quinoa, is that right?
I think most people pronounce it quinoa, which is fairly similar to the Quechua pronunciation, quinoa.
Quinoa, okay.
One difference is that we aspirate that k. We say quinoa, but in Spanish and Quechua, there's no aspiration on the k sound.
Okay.
Quechua is very interesting in that it has an unaspirated k, it has an aspirated k, and it also has an adjective.
I'm a bit confused about the aspirated k and the unaspirated k.
Well, if we take 2 English words, we've got to kill somebody, which begins with a K, and it's aspirated, kill. We are adding s to that k sound. Mm-hmm. But then in skill, we've added an S, and that means in English, at least, that the K is unaspirated. So it's skill.
Okay.
We don't say skill.
Okay, I got it. Okay.
So that's the difference between aspirated and unaspirated.
Okay,
and in English, we say quinoa, but I think in Quechua, and any Quechua speakers can correct me, but I think in Quechua, it's unaspirated. So it's quinoa.
Quinoa. Okay.
So the final loan word at number 10, how do we pronounce it and where does it come from?
I kind of know this one because I have been corrected myself. I used it in a video myself. And I got an angry comment. It was in German, and I got a comment from a German speaker. So the word is, in English, I'd say zeitgeist. But I got a comment when I mentioned this word from a German speaker. No, excuse my German. No, it's not zeitgeist. It's zeitgeist. Is that right?
Yes, you're perfectly correct. But really, it depends what language you're speaking. If you're speaking English, then we usually say zeitgeist and follow the spelling to sound rules of English. This word has actually been in English since 1848. So it's been in English for a while. We've been pronouncing it as zeitgeist for quite some time. So it's unlikely that you'll find English speakers saying zeitgeist, unless, of course, they're speaking German.
Okay. Now when I use it, which is not that often, I try to find a middle ground. I say zeitgeist. Is that fair enough?
Well, the question is, do you use the z sound at the beginning? So is it zeitgeist, as English speakers would say, or do you put the affricate s at the beginning? That's a T followed by an S. Side. That's what you need to decide. And that is German. The Z is English.
Okay. And what about the meaning?
And would you like to define it, or shall I?
If I think literally, it means like the spirit of the times.
Yes, exactly.
So I was watching an episode of Black Mirror. And some of these episodes talking about technology and how it's affecting our lives, it captures the zeitgeist or zeitgeist. Is that right?
Yes, exactly.
And zeit is time. Is that right? Is time ghost or?
Yes, exactly. Time spirit, time ghost. Spirit is a better translation because then we can say spirit of the times, which gives the definition, a set of ideas, beliefs of a particular period. So we've reached the end of the loanword pronunciation challenge. Thank you, Gideon. What word did you find the most challenging out of all of these?
Definitely kebab.
Yes.
But I'm going to practice that. And next time, well, if they do I'm vegetarian, so I don't really eat the.
So am
if
I.
I could, oh, you are too. Okay, but I'm going to ask for. I'm going to go and practice that at my local kebab shop and see what they say.
Do you mean the doner part?
Yeah,
Or,
yeah, the doner kebab. Is that right?
The P is at the end.
Oh, doner kebab.
Kebab.
Kebab. Definitely going to practice that.